Welcome to the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. I'm your host, Simone Morris, and I have a passion for empowering others to take responsibility for their careers. Yes, I've written several books on owning your career and am loving hosting this podcast. This podcast is for you if you're willing to make a shift to the driver's seat in your career. We feature leaders who inspire, empower, and motivate you for consistent career action for results. Please continue to join us every Sunday when a new episode is released. Let's get into this week's show. Ronice Latta is the CEO of New Levels LLC, a firm designed to help develop, equip, and empower men and women to pursue a purpose-driven life. Ronice spent 26 years in various accounting positions before shifting her talents to entrepreneurship. She's passionate about helping others to obtain greater fulfillment and authentic success in their next acts. Ronice, she was inspired during a hiatus to write her debut book, The Layover, devotionals for when you're between where you were and where you're going. It was released in 2020 by Trilogy Christian Publishing. We are delighted to have Ronice with us on the show today. And without further ado, let's welcome Ronice to the show. Ronice, Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year, Simone.
Welcome to the podcast. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
I'm excited to be here, kicking off the new year with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I was reading your bio to our listeners, and it says that you, after 26 years, decided to go into entrepreneurship. What brought that about?
Well, I can tell you honestly that it wasn't voluntarily initially. I was in corporate America for 26 years with the same company. And one day the company decided to sever its financial services arm. My business was the first on the chopping block, and it did not include the workers. And so as a result, we had to find somewhere else to go. And I did initially try to stay there. I interviewed for a couple of jobs, but they just didn't pan out. And so I got the message that it was just time for me to go somewhere else.
Well,
it was
God
time
probably
to
had
turn
a
the
plan
chapter.
for you. Sorry about that.
Simone.
Yes, when you're trying to fight the message that you're receiving, and each door keeps closing, and you're like, let me try to stay.
Exactly. I mean, I had no reason to think that this was the end. 26 years at one company, moving from level to level, doing different things. It was a huge global company. And so I didn't accept it. I guess I was in denial initially, like, okay, maybe it just means it's the end for me in this particular business. There were a lot of other businesses that I could have gone to. But it didn't take me long to understand that I was being released for something greater.
And now I have a question. So would you say that you were in the driver's seat? This show is about being in the driver's seat, so very hands-on in your career. Would you say that when you spend 26 years at one company, that you were well positioned in the driver's seat, or what was going on for you?
Yeah, I was in the driver's seat, and I'm in the driver's seat now. I just switched cars. So I switched vehicles. It's kind of like when you're dancing, you don't always stay with the same partner, right? Sometimes you move from one partner to the next, or still on the dance floor, but we switch partners. So I would say I switched vehicles, but I stayed in the driver's seat.
I love that. That may be the title of your episode. How to switch vehicles successfully. Yes, because maybe some folks need a new vehicle for 2022.
Absolutely. I mean, we could just run with this analogy if we wanted to, but I want to stay on track. But you mean, how many of us get to the point where we need to get a new vehicle? And sometimes we upgrade, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes we downgrade. We
Mm.
don't always need the big vehicle after the children are out of the house. Sometimes we downgrade to a smaller vehicle, and sometimes it's the opposite when you're a new family just getting started. I remember driving a Toyota when I first got married. And then after we had my son, we upgraded to a Jeep Cherokee, right? God was enlarging our territory, so we needed more space. And so the same is true for what happened with me, is that I pivoted to purpose. I moved from being an accountant and into being an author. And it's the authorship that opened doors that I could not have ever dreamed or imagined.
So when you were in the corporate space, did you have a desire to be an author? Was that ever something in the back of your mind that someday you would write a book?
To be honest, I didn't have a dream to be an author, but the thought was planted many times as far as my writing skills,
Mm.
because people would always comment or compliment me regarding my writing skills. I used to write standard operating procedure manuals. And who in corporate America don't have to write memos, right? So
Right.
people would just make comments in regards to things that I wrote. And my husband and my son actually saw the author in me. They always thought that I should write. Because everything that I did, Simone, when I think about and reflect on my past, even now, I was always in leadership roles. So I was always in the driver's seat, right? Even I'm the mother of 2 children, and I was always very active in their schools. And so that included being the president of, parent councils. Even then, I was writing. It was
Mm.
always important to me to establish expectations in writing.
Mm. Would you say there was a time when you were in the passenger seat? And I know for me personally, I was in the the passenger seat for many years because it was easy to do so. I was in a
Mm-hmm.
job that paid well, and I had access to travel and all these different opportunities, and it was easy, or so I
Mm-hmm.
thought. And so I allowed others to navigate, hey, here's this opportunity that you would be great for this role. And so without really thinking through my larger plan,
Mm-hmm.
spending the time on that, I would agree, and off I would go down this road. So for me,
Mm-hmm.
those years felt like I was in the passenger seat because there came a time when I woke up and said, this is not the path that I want for me. I want something more. So was there ever a
Yeah.
time that you felt that you weren't in the driver's seat in your career?
Yeah. Well, what you just said resonates with me. Um, Although I would use the word that I got comfortable
Mm.
in corporate America, and I allowed limits to be placed on me in corporate America. And they were really limitations that I set on myself, because as my family was growing, I remember getting to the point that in order for me to move up from management, it was going to require me to do more and to spend even more hours than I was already spending at the office.
Mm.
And so I put a cap there. So to continue with the analogy of being in the driver's seat, had I remained in the driver's seat, I would have fallen asleep at the wheel because I got too comfortable. So in that way, I can relate to definitely being in the driver's seat because I like to be a responsible driver. So let's say I was in the driver's seat. Yes, for sure. In that way, in that I got very comfortable. And so
Yeah.
when I ended up leaving corporate America, it wasn't an easy task. It wasn't an easy decision to make in order to say, once I made that decision that I wanted to no longer stay on the corporate path. It was very difficult because again, I was comfortable. I was comfortable with the culture. I was comfortable with the pay. I was comfortable with the benefits. The list goes on, right? I've been there for 26 years with the same company, grew up with the people who were there. And many of them have become like family.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that happens. And so if I had not been forced out of the seat, out of the driver's seat, out of the passenger seat, out of the car, period, I would still be right there. I'm sure of it. And so while I wasn't happy when that happened, and it took me a while to reconcile my loss, now that I'm on the other side, I'm grateful for the experience.
So well said. What would you say to those who are in a position where they have to make a decision? Because I find that when you switch over from corporate, I was decades in corporate. And when I switched over, there was a yearning to go back, just like you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And there has to come a point where you say to yourself, okay, that's it. I'm going to choose a path, not going to straddle the line. I think when you straddle the line, you confuse the universe, and you even confuse yourself. What are you doing? So you have to make a decision. Where are you going? So how long did it take you to decide, okay, I'm going to get onto this other path, and I'm going to stay on this other path, and I am going to close the door to that path that I have been on for, almost 3 decades?
It took me at least a year. I believe it was more. But as I reflect back, it was a good year because I received a decent package. My layoff occurred in July. So it was the summer months. I had always dreamed and desired having the summer off, right? And so I enjoyed as best I could. As best I could, I say, mentally it was challenging for me. Emotionally it was challenging, the release from the company. I felt like I had gotten a divorce. So I didn't just fully throw myself, I didn't fully initially embrace, right, the divorce, right? I consider my severance package felt like divorce papers. I don't mean to be so dramatic, but I'm just going to be real and honest with you. That's what it felt like, right? Like I had given my life to this person, this entity.
26 years.
Yeah. And then here you go saying you want to go in another direction. So it took me some time to accept it. And so because it was all I knew, when I did decide to start looking again, I kept being attracted back to those spaces. But once and that is when I'm talking to other people, right? Networking. I was familiar with the corporate space. So even with networking, I was talking to people still in that space. My friends who were still with the company were reaching out to me. Opportunities were coming in from the corporate space because everyone knew that's what I was. But since once I started writing, and that was the way when I had my breakthrough, if you will. Because I was writing in order to encourage myself. It was journaling, but it was actually writing. And I was writing to encourage myself and to give myself hope and to try to find guidance. And I wrote for 2 years. And while I was at some point during that 2 years, while I was writing, a vision was beginning to form. And I started to drift off from that corporate road. I mean, literally, physically and spiritually. I began to drift into another lane. And a new space was created. And I started down that road and I just kept going. And I never looked back. Sometimes people feel like they want to do that, right? In life, you just want to get in a car, get in your vehicle and just go.
Right.
Until you run out of gas. And I think that's what happened to me. I just kept going until I ran out of gas.
Yeah. No, that makes sense, because there's a healing when you're in a relationship, and I consider working for someone else and being in the corporate space a major relationship. So to then come out of that and to figure out a new way of living or new way of being, because I do think that our identities get really wrapped up into the work that we
Oh,
do. And,
oh
and
my
so
goodness.
there is a reframing, a purging. There's a lot that has to happen for you to resurface and to thrive
Absolutely.
on this new path.
Absolutely. I had a major identity crisis.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I did. I had a major identity crisis because all I knew was this place, this space, and it was an elite company. It was a well-known company. It's a global company. It was a company that many people wanted to work for.
Sure.
And so I was very, again, comfortable. I was very spoiled to some extent.
Yeah.
And so they made it very easy for you to be company now to be comfortable. Now, granted, it was a company that required a lot of hard work, commitment. They want deadlines. Every deadline was due yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
So I was accustomed to a very fast-paced lifestyle. But once I ran out of gas
Yeah.
and I was able to slow down,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I'll never forget, Simone, the day when I slowed down and just said, okay, let me just take a walk. I was at the grocery store shopping, and I went out to the car to put my groceries in. And I'm just going to be honest, I'm one of those people who back then, sometimes I was just too busy to put the cart back in the right place. And this particular day, I found myself just moseying on over to the cart area, and I nicely placed the cart. And I was like,
What is this about?
And I've been doing it every day since, and that's been years ago.
Oh my goodness. My moment was taking sabbaticals. I knew it was time for a new path when I took an unpaid sabbatical to reflect on what was next. I didn't quit right away. I took a sabbatical.
Mhm.
And it was just so freeing. So I totally get what you're saying about taking time to just reclaim your identity. You're so right about getting lost behind big brands. In fact, one of the things, listeners, my company is named after myself to remind me not to forget about my brand, because I think you can go into spaces and forget who you are and take on a corporate brand where people just associate you with the brand, and it now becomes your brand and what you stand for. So I am very mindful of reminding myself to stay on the Simone Morris brand. So what you said, Ronice, resonated with me. And when we come back from the break, I'd like to talk to you about your formula for owning your career and maybe some resources that you can share with our listeners. So let's take a short break and come back. Hi there. I hope you're enjoying this episode. This interview is amazing. I do so love it. I want to just jump in and let you know a couple ways that you can work with me. First of all, you can always go to connectwithsimone.com, and it will give you the opportunity to get to my books, website, etc. If you want to sit down and have a conversation about your career directly, you can go to careerbreakthroughcall.com and book a free 30-minute call with me to talk about, what's happening in your career. Do you need help with building your confidence? Do you need help with identifying strategic relationships that you need for career success? Do you need help building a career plan? Whatever it is, I'm sure that I can help. So do go to careerbreakthroughcall.com and set up a time for us to have a conversation. Again, it's a free 30-minute call to have a conversation. That's it for now. Let's get back to the interview. Welcome back to the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. Today, I'm talking with the fabulous Ronice Latta, and we are having a delightful conversation. Ronice, when we took a break, we were just heading towards really talking through what are the key ingredients, would you say, are necessary to own your career? So what is your formula for owning your career?
Well, this may sound odd to some, but um, one of the biggest things for me with owning my career was being okay with being vulnerable.
Mm,
I was accustomed to, I'm a former accountant, and I was so accustomed to 1 + 1 having to equal 2, everything having to add up, having to know, having a daily planner, monthly planner, quarterly planner. And so once I left and got into the space of uncertainty, I realized that I was in a vulnerable place and I was going to have to move a bit organically through the world.
mm,
And that initially didn't feel good to me
mm,
because that was an unknown space for me. But once, and then also when you're looking for a job and you're networking and you're having to rely on other people for opportunities to get in front of someone for an introduction, to get an interview, to make connections, and just all that stuff is a vulnerable space. And so for me, accepting and embracing the vulnerable me was part of me taking ownership of who I am. Another thing was mentorship. I never was one who ever thought that I needed a mentor.
mm,
It wasn't anything that I thought I was so good that I didn't need a mentor. It was just nothing that I ever prioritized.
mhm,
But once I got out in the space and I started meeting people in different um, ages and stages of life, and I started gleaning wisdom and knowledge, it was so liberating to
mm,
not just rely on yourself, but to appreciate. And it was just such a wonderful thing that pretty much everyone who I was introduced to was so open, with their advice and with their time.
mm,
Yeah. And so for me, those were the two things that had to do with me owning my career and to just be open to the fact that I have purpose in this life. Huge, huge revelation that it wasn't about the fact that I was just good with numbers. Because, when I was in high school and I decided I wanted to be an accountant, it was primarily because I was good with numbers. And I thought the accounting field would be make me more marketable once I graduated. It would be a good field to make the type of money that I wanted to make. It was a lot of surface reasons
mhm,
for choosing that profession. But now that I'm in the driver's seat in this new vehicle, now life is more so, it's more purposeful, it's more meaningful.
mm,
And so as a result, I am just in a different space now. I want to make it clear that my years in corporate America, I totally enjoyed them. I learned so much. I traveled, right? It was just a wonderful time until it wasn't. And isn't that how life is? Things are
yes,
great until they're not. And
yes,
sometimes it happens overnight. Sometimes it happens gradually. For me, that happened gradually because when the layoff occurred, I remained with the company after it for 2.5 years because I was in management and we needed to, um, close the sales and close the books and we had the archive. There were all these things that had to take place. So I was there for additional 2.5 years before I actually left.
wow,
Yeah. And so that it was like a mourning period that I went through.
mm,
That was something I didn't mention earlier. But that contributed to the sadness and the grief that I felt in my exodus because I went through a mournful period.
yeah,
Um, but like anything that you mourn, anything that you grieve, the loss of, if you're fortunate, once you get to the other side, you gain some things along the way.
mm, Now,
So that's what I did.
what would you say are resources that helped you to make that transition? Because you sound so much at peace. That's what I'm thinking of. It sounds like you're in such a, I imagine and I recall the corporate days of just go, like I just felt like I was always on and go, 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 you know, whatever. I'm not sure your experience, but as you talk to me today, it just sounds like just this peace.
Yeah.
Peace within, peace with who you are, this comfortableness with who you are, what you stand for, how you show up. And so, I just wonder what resources helped you. Can you think back of resources that helped you just to prepare yourself for where you are today?
I have been honest with you the entire time we've been talking, so I'm not going to stop now. The Bible is the resource that gave me peace then, and it's the one that sustains me now. When you are hurting as much as I was, when you are as confused as much as I was, when you are seeking guidance as much as I was, there was really for me no other book per se that any one person could have written that was going to help me deal with all the internal struggles and the lack of confidence, because my confidence took a hit when I left. Yeah, my confidence took a hit. And so for me, it was very much a spiritual journey. And so the Bible was a book that I cling to. Now, there were other books that I read, but as I moved forward with the writing piece of it all. But the Bible is the word that gave me the grace that I needed for the journey, but also it taught me how to be graceful to myself. We can be so hard on ourselves. And I was initially, I was like, how could you not have a plan B? Again, being a planner, how could I let this happen and not have an alternative plan? But I learned on my journey that it really wasn't for me to have it figured out. Some things you have to figure out as you go along, and that's part of the personal growth. And so I grew so much. So you mentioned peace. Thank you for saying that. Thank you for seeing that and acknowledging that, because it hasn't always been. It's been a journey to get here. But I'm here now, and I plan on guarding it with everything that's within me.
Well, give us a scripture that can speak to those of us on the journey as well.
Proverbs 3:5, verse 3-6. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart. Lean not into thine own understanding, but in all thy ways acknowledge him, and he will direct thy path. That was one for me.
That's beautiful. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. That's beautiful. I love that. Lean not to your own understanding, because oftentimes things are happening to us in our careers where we're trying to figure out, try to understand what's happened. And sometimes we can't understand decisions or things that have happened.
Yeah, and isn't that true for where we are today? And with the world, with the pandemic, we can't make sense of everything that's happening for ourselves, let alone trying to explain it to our children. You and I are mothers. I can't explain what's happening no more to my 6-year-old as I can to my 24-year-old. We're all going through this. We're all in this together, and we're all trying to figure it out as we go along. But there's no, we don't have the human capacity to make sense of it all. And so it's those moments for me, I have no choice in order to maintain peace, to just say, I don't understand it all. I don't have all the answers, but I know who does. And I'm just going to trust in my Heavenly Father to make crooked places straight and to make it clear what His will is for my life. And that is what was another hurdle that I got over with. I had to stop just being so concerned with what I had written out as to what I wanted the rest of my life or the next 5 years, 10 years to look like, and to consult God and say, what is it that you want my life to look like? And so now that I'm an author, speaker, entrepreneur, I could not have ever designed my life the way things are going now. I could not have ever imagined, and I imagine you have those moments as well, going from corporate to entrepreneurship. You know, we have these gifts and these talents that are just, for many, have just been lying dormant, or we haven't been working them to its fullest capacity. And so I went from writing standard operating procedures, right, and memos to writing books that are now impacting people and inspiring people across the world. No, going back to what you said, that was not my dream. It is now. I had put a cap on my life when I was in corporate America. Now the sky is truly the limit.
Sky's the limit. Would you say that that's, well, you tell me, let me not answer for you. What would you say would be a title that summarizes or brings together your career body of work? What would you title it?
I'll tell you what comes to mind. Plans are made to be broken. Plans are made to be broken. And this is something that, again, in the pandemic that we're in, I'm learning it more and more each day. I'm learning it more and more as with every event or every anything that's going on in my life or my daughter's life, every basketball game, every sporting event that's being canceled due to the pandemic. So I learned that lesson early on when I left corporate America and when I, moved into this space. But I'm learning it even more so, or more, I should say, my daughter's learning it because she's very much like me, being a planner, the planner. And so I'm trying to teach her early on so she don't have to have as hard a time as I had with letting go of my broken plans, right? Sometimes things are broken, but when they are put back together, it creates a masterpiece that is more beautiful than what the original was.
You are so good at analogies. Each visual I am visualizing. And by the way, I probably could be your agent because I'm like, that would be a good next book for you. Love it. We've had such a good time. I want to thank you for coming on the show, sharing a bit more of who you are and your journey. Can you tell our listeners how they can stay connected with you?
Sure. Well, first, let me tell you, thank you for having me. It's been a joy. Your listeners can stay in contact with me via social media. I am on Instagram as Ronice Latta, RONICE LATTA. I am on Facebook as Ronice Felicia Latta. And I want to point out that I do what's called a dose of the day. So on each platform. So if you are in need of an encouraging word, please follow me because I'll have an inspirational word for you along with the scripture every day. And you can also check me out at www.newlevelswithronice.com.
Love that. All right, Ronice, thanks for dropping by the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Simone. I appreciate you as well.
I sincerely hope that you enjoyed this week's empowering career story on the podcast. If you did, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. Wherever you listen to the podcast, be sure that you are subscribing and that you rate and review the podcast. It's so important as we continue to spread the word of career empowerment. In addition, you can head over to the LinkedIn platform and join the Power of Owning Your Career discussion group. There you can have access to the guests who have been on the podcast, as well as others listening to the podcast, as well as myself, where we can continue the conversation. I hope to see you on that platform. You can also email me at pooyc@simonemorris.com if you have a suggestion for guest or a message that you want me to hear personally. Thanks so much, and make it an inspiring, empowering week in your career.